Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode in our first season of the FIP Chief Executive Officer interviews. Today, I have the honour to interview Steven Kern. Thank you, Steven, for making time for us in your busy agenda, especially during these strange COVID-19 times. I wanted to welcome you to season 1 of the FIP CEO interviews. You are one of our 10 interviews that we have held with global leaders and colleagues in pharmacy and healthcare. We're seeking to explore your journey, your experiences, and the impact of those experiences on your professional practice. I was inspired to start these discussions after FIP President Dominique Jourdain and myself were having a meeting with Professor Trevor Jones around the development of a vaccine and treatments for COVID-19. Trevor walked us through his experiences with AZT in the 1980s and 1990s. And how invaluable those lessons have been for the times we're in now. But the thing was, Steven, not only was Trevor so open about what had gone well and what hadn't gone to plan, he was enthusiastic to share those experiences and learnings. And it made me reflect on how important it is for us to get some insight into the lessons our global leaders have, so they can share those lessons and insights, not just the good times, but when things don't quite go to plan. So, Steven, I'm proud to interview you today in the first season. We can't wait to listen to some of the insights with the profession, and maybe I can get some life lessons from you too. We aim to take around 30 minutes, but before we get started, welcome, Steven. Hi.
Hi, Catherine, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really honored to be here. And after listening to Professor Trevor Jones's presentation or discussion with you, I was really impressed by it. So I hope I can live up to the expectations. I'm not the CEO of the Gates Foundation, but at least I'm happy to be able to participate.
Well, we're delighted to have you on board, and you definitely will live up to our expectations, let me tell you. Before we get started on your professional journey, Steven, I just thought it would be really lovely for you to share a little bit about childhood and where your inspirations for choosing your career and where you've ended up came from.
Yeah, so I grew up in very traditional American middle-class family, suburban New York City area, so in New Jersey. And my parents were a school teacher and a nurse. And I was the 5th of 5 children. So that gave me one of the important opportunities, I would say, early on in my life. I got to watch mistakes that my siblings made and then not repeat them. Right, so that was very hopeful thing for me actually to learn. In fact, they'll tell you that they think I got away with a lot of things because I learned from their lessons. But one of the things that was early on, I used to listen to my mother, who's the nurse, talk about some of her experiences. She grew up in Rahway, New Jersey, and Rahway was actually the home of Merck pharmaceutical company. And my grandfather, his last job was a contractor actually for Merck. And one of my mother's high school friends that she used to go to school at Rahway High School with was Roy Vagelis. And, interestingly, my mother used to say to me, "You should be like that Roy Vagelis, Steven. He was really smart. He could do a lot of good things." But she would always end her conversation with, "But I was better than he was in math." And so interestingly, about 3 years ago, I got to meet Roy because he came to the Gates Foundation and gave a talk about their really tremendous program that they had put forward at ivermectin. And ivermectin, which has been an extremely effective antiparasitic drug that Merck donates throughout the world, actually, for treating onchocerciasis and other parasitic diseases. And so I went up to Roy after his talk and I introduced myself. I said, "I've known you my whole life. My mother has told me to be like you." And so he was really humbled by that. And it was a really great conversation just to recall that, there was the example of really trying to advance out of your own background and really starting to have an impact in the world. And somebody like Roy Vagelis had done it from Rahway. My mother said, "You can do that too." So.
A real sense of listening as you were a small child to your mum and her experiences, and then just this strange parallel life that you can lead sometimes, where your path crossed with Roy himself and you were able to tell him. I think Stephen is it's really heartwarming, isn't it? And
yeah,
it
and it
shows
was
you
great
that,
to see his
yeah,
smile, and also, you know, that he remembered my mother and who she was, and so it was quite a nice exchange, actually.
they're really lovely. I like also the parallel between it being the home of Merck and then Merck having such an impactful role in ivermectin and then bringing that to the Gates as well. There's some nice little parallels here. Fifth of 5 children. Yeah, you definitely have learned from those that have gone before you. Stephen, we'll come back to a little bit more about your childhood or your background throughout, because these things that happen to us early in our lives are so impactful. I think that there's a little thread that runs through most of the things that we talk about in terms of pride and achievements, etc. Let's move on then, Stephen. So when I read your biography, it's so impressive and full of achievements, namely actually around teamwork, invention, leadership. You lead a team of scientists focused on gaining insight from data coming from the Gates Foundation investments to inform program strategies in global health. And this is obviously where you and I have overlapped in our roles. The group, Quantitative Sciences group, your group, is focused on quantitative data analysis to support these program strategies for therapeutic projects that the foundation funds. And your effort extends across all therapeutic areas in which the foundation is involved, namely things I think you've touched on just above, which includes neglected tropical diseases, HIV, pandemic preparedness, never more important, but also maternal and child health, family planning, and some of those diseases like malaria and tuberculosis, which we may think don't impact us. But I note, Stephen, and I think this is really important when we come to the question I'm about to ask you, that you and your team are strong advocates of making research data always fair and sometimes open to improve the impact that data can have towards the problem. This seems to me to be a very egalitarian approach. Stephen, many of the things that we learn along our way don't just come from the successes, they come from lessons we've learned. What would you consider to be the 3 biggest lessons of your career?
I think, you know, a couple of things to focus on. One is to really spend time to be clear about, you know, why you're doing what it is you're doing, right? So if I know exactly what I'm trying to achieve with the work and the effort that I'm putting forward in a project or in a program, that's really, really key. So as an example to your point of accessing data, you know, we were very strong proponent at the Gates Foundation of trying to get data to be available and open so that it can be shared in a safe and responsible way and used across different investigators and different places throughout the world. And so when we started our open access policy in terms of both publication and data, we didn't have a clear definition of what we would do with that. And so as we got started with it, it was a principle that we all agreed to, but we hadn't really thought about, okay, now that we have this data available, what happens to it next, right? And so it's really important to make sure that you're doing things not just for the sake of achieving them and ticking a box, but that you have an idea of what you want to do with that as a consequence and what happens next. Because I think if you don't do that, you miss the opportunities to really amplify what it is that you're working on to begin with. The second thing, and I learned this, you know, prior to being at the Gates Foundation, I was a professor at the University of Utah. And I very strongly learned in that role, don't solve problems you don't have. And to that, I mean, you know, it's important to be aware of the challenges and the opportunities and the holes that might come forward that you need to be aware of, but don't solve them until you actually have to solve them. Oftentimes I found, and particularly in the academic setting, many problems solve themselves before I had to intervene. And so if you're cognizant of them and you can see them so that you're prepared and you can be proactive when you need to be, that's a real important lesson. It kept me from wasting a lot of energy on things that I probably didn't have to spend time on. And then, you know, one of the things I'm learning right now, Catherine, as well as we all are in COVID-19, is that, you know, your life work it's more of a marathon than a sprint. So, you know, you can't run at full pace the whole time. You have to actually think about the pacing and the path of how you're going to accomplish things and make progress. And that requires some patience. And sometimes patience is hard, especially when we're faced with situations where we say, gosh, we want a solution to this now, we need it right away. There are senses of urgency that need to be importantly taken up, but to be able to actually think about this in the long run as a cumulative is really key. We have a phrase in the Gates Foundation, it's right in the front door, and it's one of the phrases that we live by, and it's referenced as an African sort of proverb or adage. It says, if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go alone. I'm sorry. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that going together far is really a big part of what I've learned and has been a crucial component of my whole career.
Those are really wise words. I'm scribbling down lots of notes, I have to say, Stephen, with this. I love the idea that we have to think why we're doing things. Thoughtfulness and mindfulness can't be overestimated when we're thinking about data and its use. And I actually think the time that we're in at the moment is giving me a lot of pause for thought around these various elements. And don't solve problems you don't have. Again, the time that we're in this COVID-19 strangeness of 2020, I think that's really wise advice, Stephen, because, you know, we've got problems in front of our noses now, and we need to be really, really focused and mindful that those are the problems that need to be solved and not look for other things to keep us busy. I think that's really wise advice. And it's so funny because recently we interviewed Rupa Dutt, who is the Executive Director of Women in Global Health, and she used exactly the same adage. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go in a team. I don't think we can underestimate the need to go far and not fast. And I think this is a real cultural shift for us, especially in what we describe as the developed world, but high income worlds. Our privilege gives us a position to think we can go fast, but we can't do it on our own, can we? It's really important. It's really wise words, Stephen. You're giving me much to think about. So moving on then, it would take me, I think, the entire interview slot and more to walk everyone through your entire career's achievements. I will endeavour to summarise a couple of the highlights. And you've mentioned previously a position in academia, but I noted prior to the position you have at the moment, you were global head of pharmacology modelling at Novartis, based in Basel, and led a team there focused on model-based drug development support to therapeutics, many of the disease conditions across all stages of drug development. I think that definitely provides us with a bit of background into how you learned not to solve problems you don't have. And you joined there from the University of Utah, which was the position you mentioned, where you were an Associate Professor of Pharmaceutics, Anesthesiology and Bioengineering, and a co-investigator at their NIH-funded Pediatric Pharmacology Research Unit. And I note, you see, when we look at our CVs or we look at our biographies, the story that's laid out there really makes sense. There's this thread of being interested in drug development. There's a thread of having funded pediatric and pharmacology research, and then looking at model-based drug development, supporting many therapeutic advances. And where you are today at Gates, your team is really focused on, you know, the evidence behind all these other therapeutic areas. Stephen, my next question would be for you, what would you count as your 3 biggest achievements to date amongst all of that?
Yeah, it's interesting question, Catherine, and you're right in the sense that, you know, retrospectively, it looks really organized and as a cohesive path. But I can tell you that prospectively, it was none of that, right? I mean, how much further do you anticipate what your next job is going to be?
Absolutely.
I mean, I think, yeah, and I think that's part of being the, you know, that first component of being clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Where is it leading you to? And I think, you know, being conscious of what you're excited about working in that space. And I've been fortunate that, you know, I've had this luxury of being able to work in some really great organizations with really great teams. So partly for me, it's always been part of being a team. So, you know, in terms of achievements, it's what have I been able to do as a member of a team to actually have impact for an overall program. And I have to say, the ones that I've been the most proud of or feel the best about have been the ones that I got the opportunity to do that I probably had no business doing. By that I mean, I was given an opportunity to work on a project that I didn't have the background. If you had looked at the job description, you wouldn't have said, oh, let's give it to him. He's the one to do that based on his background. But for one reason or another, there was some characteristic that allowed me to get connected to that project. And when I saw that, then I seized the opportunity and really learned and really threw myself in it, because it was a great opportunity. Somebody had put some confidence in you to be able to do something. So you want to be able to show, hey, what can I do with that? One of my very first jobs, I used to work for an infusion pump company that made antibiotic infusion pumps. And we had this opportunity to pivot the product line into intravenous anesthetic delivery systems. And I was the youngest engineer, as I'm an engineer by training, but always in the practice, and the application towards medicine. And so I was the youngest engineer and was assigned this project because no one else was free to be able to do it. And it was a great opportunity for me to actually learn clinical pharmacology, to work with a mentor who actually became a lifelong mentor from that project with me. In fact, I still collaborate with him. And he ultimately was the person that brought me to Novartis. So there is a connection that happens in all these links. So I think not being fearful to take on challenging opportunities that then take your core skill and allow you to expand them, learn new things, bring some new insights into a project. But to do that means you have to be willing to be comfortable not knowing everything and know where to go find resources that can help you learn the important criteria to make your program successful. And I've had similar ones of examples of that in academics, similarly, as well as at Novartis. And it's each time those kinds of opportunities open a door that you probably couldn't have anticipated, and then create this chance that, for me, I kind of look at that and say, well, ultimately, that's how I ended up right now at the Gates Foundation. Because at Novartis, I had worked with Trevor Mundell, who is our global health president here at the Gates Foundation. And he knew what we could do as a group in terms of using quantitative analysis to essentially explore and optimize the way drug development was moving forward at Novartis, and felt like that was a key characteristic that the Gates Foundation needed to have. And so I was fortunate to be able to come over and join from that. And even the work in academics was always trying to combine my engineering skills to optimize delivery of therapeutics for those that oftentimes don't have the benefit of large clinical trials. In this case, it was preterm infants and neonates in the ICU as a challenge.
I love these. Thank you, Steve, so much. Because obviously, as a pharmacist, we're all about the medicines and all about understanding the evidence and what have you. And what's always inspired me is your seeking out to understand more about how pharmacists can contribute to global health has been part of our discussions. And within that, you've done some of the work that I know many of my so-called clinical colleagues, who work perhaps in specialist areas like pediatrics, they struggle with the application of new therapeutics in a population we just don't have much evidence for. And where, the worst thing you could say to a parent would be, I'm sorry, we don't have the evidence to try that. So for me and for my profession, I know that working with those who come from different disciplines and different areas of practice really enhances what we can do. And this, this engineering part of our profession, the pharmaceutics, the ways in which these medicines, the formulations work and can be engineered better, is really part of the fundamental reason that we need pharmacy and pharmacists. And I think you just shine a light on that for me. I must say though, Steve, that just to feed back to you, that whilst you've said one of your achievements is not being fearful to take opportunities, I think also there's a sense that I'm hearing that you want to give opportunities to others as well. So we often get those opportunities from mentors, and then that teaches us or sparks something in us, which means that we do that for others. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's one of the great opportunities I have right now in my current position is that, I can collaborate with other people and enable their ideas, their thoughts, their big plans to move forward in a cohesive way through the work that we're doing at the Gates Foundation. But I also get the opportunity to work with young people who are in much early stages in their career and then help to foster and support their programs. I mean, as our team, as you mentioned, works within the Gates Foundation, we work across all the different therapeutic areas. And when people actually ask me, what do I do for my job at the Gates Foundation? The phrase I often say is, I'm an enabler, right? So I'm an enabler of your program to be more effective. I'm an enabler of your idea to maybe try out and to go forward. And we have this tremendous luxury at the Gates Foundation. Warren Buffett, who's one of our co-chairs and trustees, constantly reminds us that if we're not failing 8 out of 10 times, we're not working on the right problems, because we're supposed to be working on really challenging and really difficult problems. And, you know, and I remember, I mean, when I was in academics, the last thing my pharmacy students would want to hear from me is that it was okay for them to fail, right? They didn't want to fail their pharmacokinetics exam. They actually wanted to pass it. But part of it is to have that opportunity to learn from things that don't work right, because you're taking big shots. And trying to do things that are difficult. And so, you know, especially in new areas where there isn't a well-trodden path, you have to learn from your experience. And that's important, back to that first principle of, you know, being clear about what you're doing, right? So if you have an idea of where you think it should head and it doesn't head that way, hey, that's interesting. Let's explore why didn't that work the way I thought it was going to work? Is it shortcoming in what I understood, or did we just uncover something really interesting? I give you an example of that with COVID. You know, as we've been looking at how do we take existing therapeutics and repurpose them to potentially be effective, it's allowed us to uncover some really interesting insights about existing old drugs that perhaps were overlooked that might expand their potential. Maybe not in COVID, but certainly in other areas.
Yes, and we, you know, these old drugs, as we call them, they have been licensed for certain uses, so we can fast track their use if we find that evidence to be impactful. So, yeah, I think this is really fascinating. You're quite right, Steve, that as a profession, we're the risk-averse colleagues in the room, pharmacists. We are here to stop mistakes from happening, and that often inculcates a sense that you mustn't fail or you can't fail. But when I look back at some of the things you've told us about your traditional US family and being the fifth of 5, you seem to have a nature where you've watched mistakes that others have made, and you're not frightened by that in a way. And that seems to come out in the last top tips you've said. Warren Buffett's advice, if we don't fail 8 out of 10 times, we're not working hard enough. I love it. And it's really a passion for me that many of our young professionals, our young pharmaceutical scientists and our young pharmacists can listen to your words and understand that, you know, mistakes along the way are not important. A mistake in patient care might be, but mistakes along the way often provide us with the biggest lessons. I really believe that. I really believe that, Stephen. It seems
and
to
I agree with
do.
you on that, Catherine. I think, Catherine, if we don't allow ourselves to learn from the little mistakes, then we set ourselves up for the bigger mistakes to you know, from too much hubris or too much arrogance, in a sense that we think we understand you know, how things really work. And I think it's really important to approach any of the problems that we're working on with a sense of humility for what you don't know. And if you do that, then, you know, actually there's a huge amount of things you can learn and understand and appreciate.
Yeah, I'm taking 2 lessons from this bit, Stephen, this one section, the notion that I'm an enabler. I think I'm going to use that as my job title, because FIP definitely isn't here to tell people what to do. We're here to enable them to support our frontline practitioners and our researchers and educators and scientists to be the best they can be. I really believe that. And your words just then, don't allow ourselves to learn from the little mistakes. How can we learn from the big ones? I remember Obama wrote a paper some 8-10 years ago now, which spoke about a trait in leadership we don't often acknowledge, which is intelligent humility and the ability to put your hands up and say, didn't quite get it right. It's very disarming. It's very powerful. It's often more powerful than some of the behaviors we're seeing right now from our governments and our who are very frightened at the moment to make mistakes. But because they're frightened to make mistakes and how that might look, they're not admitting when things aren't quite going to plan. In the biggest pandemic any of us will face, please God. Yeah, so this intelligent humility piece really chimes with me, Stephen, and I think it'll be very important as people listen to this interview.
Yeah,
Stephen,
and
I mean,
there's an important part on that, Catherine, in that it's okay to say I don't know and I don't understand.
Yeah.
But that's not an excuse to then not understand, right? Because the follow-up sentence that comes on that is, and here's what I'm going to do to learn and understand that better, right? That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to do this to see if I can understand. Or, help me understand, let's work on this together as we figure out where is our common knowledge going to be able to chart into this new territory. And that's very much what's happening with all of the work that's going on in COVID. We're learning all the time. If we stay open to that idea of learning and trying to do it in an informed way, it also helps the information to the public, right, about how much we know and what we don't know, to build trust. Because I think if we come across as, well, we say it should be this way and it's not that way, that's a great way to lose confidence with people who've had trust in you. So to be able to clearly articulate, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and here's how we're going to go forward to understand better. That's the important characteristic, I think, for building that sense of trust, particularly with the community.
I couldn't agree more. And we really need that trust at the moment, don't we? We do not need division. I love your idea about asking for people to work it out with you. And it puts me in mind, Stephen, of a coaching technique I was taught many years ago, when if you have a problem to solve, it's often better to go round the table and sit next to the person who's with you to solve the problem shoulder to shoulder, rather than to be doing it on opposite sides of the table, if that makes sense. And whilst it's not necessarily directly applicable to the situation we're in right now, I think all of us need to realize we're on the same side here. And that's the public, the communities, the professions, the scientists, the governments, the politicians. And that would really unite us a bit more, I think. But, we've got the answers on the interview. If they listen, we'll be happy to help them, won't we?
Yeah,
so there's
it's been really interesting to actually see this as well with colleagues, particularly, I think as I work a lot with scientists, citizens, governments in low-income settings, there's often this divide that happens between the higher income countries, where we think because we've got certain advances, we have insights that perhaps aren't shared there. But in fact, it's not the case at all. And the key that we have to understand is the context that we want solutions to go into, particularly in a low-income setting. There's oftentimes challenging contexts that we never thought about. So our great technical solutions, which will quote unquote solve the problem, can work, but they won't work in that context. And so if we don't take in the knowledge and the insight and have that humility to work in partnership side by side with people who we're trying to help, then it actually means that our probability of success can oftentimes be low.
And imagine that, Stephen, that we could learn from high income countries, we could learn from the low income countries. Just imagine that. That would be.
Well, I do it every day. I can tell you, Catherine. It's a very, and one of the things that again we're trying to do, particularly in this COVID crisis, is to leverage that knowledge and to free it, to give it capability in terms of either access to data, access to information, and pull into a collaborative network. So we have a great program going on with collaborators in the UK around creating a common workbench for data analysis so that people can come together and work on data. It's not intending to be a repository that scoops up all the data, but it's a space where people can come and work on a project together, and it can do it in a secure space when that's required, or in an open way when it's not required. But again, to facilitate the opportunity. And I've said commonly to the people that one of the successes for me of this program is that the scientists in Dar es Salaam really get insight into how to deal with COVID from understanding data from Oxford, London, Cleveland, and maybe Tokyo. And then in turn, those cities learn and watch Dar es Salaam and say, that's what we need to do as well. So there's a give and take here that we need to take advantage of. And if we don't, I don't think in this current crisis that we're all facing, we're going to be able to get to a solution fast enough.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the scientists have really led the collaborative culture change that we needed. I'm really proud to see that. Stephen, I've just said I'm really proud of that. And my next question is simply, what are the 3 things you're most proud of?
Yeah, those are really interesting. That's a great question to answer. I don't think about that too often, but I think one of the ones that I feel most proud of is that I feel like in every opportunity that I've worked in, I can point to specific projects or specific accomplishments that really help move that program forward and really contributed to the success. It's not like there's one where you pick at and you go, okay, that's the thing that he is most known for. It's really contributing to the fabric of helping the organization be more effective. So as an example, as I said, in the infusion pump company, it was completely transitioning a product line into enabling intravenous anesthesia to make huge progress because the therapeutics were available. They didn't have the delivery systems. And so we quickly created a delivery system that then just opened an opportunity for expanding that. And I think that's helped the field of anesthesia, for instance, to work more effectively. And then, again, in academics, really enjoyed working with pharmacists and really enjoyed the opportunity to teach pharmacists about pharmacokinetics and in a way that was empowering for them, because oftentimes people would feel like, oh, I'm not so good at math. In fact, I had a pharmacy student once who said to me, well, I went into pharmacy because I'm good at chemistry, but I'm not good at math. And I said, well, you can't be good at chemistry if you're not good at math. Maybe you just need to know how good you are in math, right? And so it's, again, making people aware of where their strengths are and then helping them through what they perceive as their challenges so that they build confidence in themselves. And a theme that's been interesting, and I didn't realize this got brought out to me by some of my graduate students when I was at the University of Utah, that they came to me one day and said, we looked across the grad students and noticed that you have the most women in your lab. And so, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really consciously thought about that. But one of the things that I feel like I've been able to do is create an environment where anyone can contribute regardless of their background, regardless of where they came from, and if they have the motivation and the interest to work with our team, then come on board and let's see what we can do going forward. And I like that. I think in one of the things I'm most proud of, I have 2 daughters, and both of those daughters have this perspective of they can do whatever they're really trying to do and set out to do. They have fairly they have a strong sense of science. They really both love science. Neither one of them are scientists per se in terms of hard science and their backgrounds. But it's been something where they've been able to inculcate this opportunity and enablement. And I'd like to feel like I can continue to do that. And now, it's one of the focal areas that we're looking at the Gates Foundation. So as I'm, just heading towards 60 years old and saying, what's going to be the next turn of my career? It's really now to be more purposeful in thinking about, okay, how do I create opportunities that will enable women, enable people of color, or people that haven't had the same opportunities to the extent that I've been fortunate to appreciate, and then continue to build systems and capabilities that help them.
So Stephen, just playing back a little bit of what I've heard, I think there's a real thread here that you're keen that whatever you do has an impact across all societies, not just keeping innovation for high-income countries, for example, but also low-income countries. And then when I hear what you've just said about enablement for women and people of colour, I see that real thread running through you. I couldn't agree with you more, though. We may not consciously make environments welcoming for women or people of colour, but I think the Black Lives Matter movement and the fact that we're in 2020 and we're still talking about needing to make places more equal and equitable means we need to be more overt in our understanding of creating environments whereby everyone, as long as they're happy to work hard and they want to strive and achieve, are welcome. So I think, Steve, this is my learning from summer of 2020. It's not enough for me to be a supporter of equity and equality and, understanding that there is inequalities and inequity everywhere. I've got to be a proponent of it, and I've got to be more proactive. So I really hear you as you're doing your reflection on what next. And I love the idea that Gates is thinking, it's always had a focus on women, but just this idea of equity and equality, it's super important.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think, a key component there is, to the point that you were just making, Catherine, I think it's great, okay, that I've been able to help people and students and in my experience, but now, really being cognizant and more purposeful. I think it's fine if you've been able to be helpful because that's your nature and that's who you are. But now, I think one of the things we're learning from all of these challenges in 2020 is the need to be more cognizant and to be more purposeful and to move things in the proper direction. And it's fascinating. I mean, one of the things that I've learned is that then, I don't have to do it from the standpoint of being in charge, right? The key is how do I become, back to our point earlier about an enabler. How do I create that enablement that's an opportunity for your talents, your experience to excel? Not that I'm the person that makes it happen. I'm just the person that helps you show, what is possible. And the ways that I can do that successfully, I think, are just they're really great challenges and really interesting opportunities to explore.
You're really living the lessons that you gave us right at the beginning, Stephen. You just said, don't solve problems you don't have. It's not up to proactive men and women to make all the solutions happen. It's up to us to make situations to enable others to make it work for themselves. And that's the overt change, isn't it? And also it's a marathon, not a sprint. Two of your big lessons right from the very start of our interview. You've just given me a great example of how you live and breathe that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one of the things that we learned, and it's been a fascinating lesson for me to learn at the Gates Foundation, is if I come up with a solution to a problem as part of a team, and we can show in a very controlled clinical trial, for instance, that this solution worked, but it doesn't scale to a global solution in the hands of the people that need it, it's really not succeeded, right? I mean, it's only a partial success, and so partly the only way things scale is to be able to work in collaboration with other people and to really understand how this can be useful and beneficial to them too. And they also want that solution that you're proposing. So I think, again, it's really key to be able to work in those kinds of collaborative components. Or, we only have partial wins. We only have, nice papers that get published in journals, great, but they didn't impact somebody's life, right? We actually wanted to keep going to that next step. And that's hard. It's really hard to do. And it requires a whole lot of collaboration. And then sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming, in all honesty, to think about. But it's really critical to be able to focus on that and say, okay, what's the next step we're going to be able to do to make this become the next level of impact? Yeah,
it really is the marathon in action, isn't it? You can't think of the 26 miles to begin with because that would just freeze you. But we have to eat that elephant, Steve. Yeah. So right at the very start, Stephen, I mentioned to you that it's so important for us to share things that we've learned along the way, get that humility out there, share where things haven't gone quite so well. What are your top tips, your 3 top tips to the next generation or colleagues who would be listening?
Yeah, I think, importantly, as I said before, that clarity, of what you're working on. So being focused in the here and now of why am I doing what I'm doing and where is that going to take me? And I think if you do that, then you start to see opportunities that maybe might have passed you by had you not been having that clarity of why you're working on it. Then, there's this sense of urgency and really making sure that we have a degree of urgency to move forward and get things done today, not waiting till tomorrow. And the challenge on that is that can lead to a lot of anxiety about the amount of work that needs to be accomplished in a short period of time. But that gets back to that whole idea of the marathon and an urgency in the sense of there'll be a time when I have to really accelerate. There's a time when I have to slow down. And so we have to be able to program in that capability so you can have some recovery, so you have this opportunity to actually refresh yourself. I'm about to go on a holiday break for a little bit just to take a little bit of downtime. And it's really important to be able to do. And then, really to approach these problems with the humility of what you don't know. I mean, I think if you're comfortable with what you don't know, your opportunity to learn is huge. If you're not comfortable with what you don't know, then you really close off the door to learn some new things. So having that humility to learn, I learned all the time from my pharmacy students. Even though I was the one teaching at the front, they taught me ways to teach better, to be more effective as a communicator, to see problems from their perspective instead of from mine. And that was really helpful overall. And I think then that, that develops a sense of resilience, right? And so having resilience is really key to being able to finish a marathon, right? And so I think these pieces all fit together into creating that opportunity. And I think it's really important to always ask yourself as a young person, is this what I want to be doing? Is this heading me in the direction? Is it positive? Am I building the skill sets? It might not be the optimal position or the optimal component, but if you're getting positive aspects out of it, if you're learning that humility or using the humility to learn and do have a sense of urgency with the work that you're doing, then each step becomes impactful. And I think that in the totality, then you can look back and say, yeah, that was a really successful and impactful career.
It does. And also I think just the wisdom that you mentioned right at the beginning, a CV of someone eminent or at a certain stage in their career can look very much like there was a plan. And very often, the majority of us, we pick opportunities as we go, and it looks like a plan in retrospect. That's what I would really say. I also love the urgency one. It's not urgency every single day. It's just don't waste the day. You don't know what's around the corner, and we need to deliver every day something that helps us along that path. As you said, Stephen, you've got to get the miles under your belt. If you're running a marathon in a set period of time, you can't waste the time. And in our jobs, we're privileged because we don't have, we don't have the same job to do every single day. So we have to make every single day count. I really believe that. Yeah, I'm with you totally.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's the key. We can't create more time, you and I. We can't make more hours in the day. So how are we going to spend those hours that we're going to dedicate to be the most impactful? And that can be on a small level as well as on a larger level.
Yeah, it's being clear, isn't it? I love it. That all fits together for me. So to end our interview, the final question, if you can believe that, Stephen, we've all had to change our habits and ways of working in these really strange times. What would you say are 3 essentials in your working life that have come to the fore during COVID-19, Stephen?
Yeah, it's, I think one of the components, and I would say, I also learned this because I worked on challenges with Ebola. I also worked on challenges with Zika. So, I've learned that it does take a while to come to the solutions. You'd like to find something very quickly. They go, here's the magic therapeutic. Here's the quick answer to help us turn this tide. And that rarely is the case. So you have to have that patience to be able to go forward. And then, we're all working from home right now, right? So my situation is not all that different, I imagine, from yours. And it's not that different from a lot of other people. So we've had to adapt to, working within our family's, normal construct and have a separation of my home life and my work life, right? So I work in one place. I try to really keep my focus on my work there. And when I leave that place, I'm not working, and I don't take things out of that room to go into, my other existence. Because I think it's important to be able to have a time for recuperation. But then it's also been, an opportunity. There's a whole bunch of new things that are happening, Catherine, that we couldn't have predicted because of COVID. Some are good, some are not good, but they all create opportunities to do things differently. And I think one of the things that I'm really appreciating is the chance to explore that and say, okay, well, we couldn't do this before for whatever reason. Maybe that reason doesn't exist now. Is there an opportunity to accelerate something going forward? And I think if we can take that perspective, then we'll be able to find the things that we were doing in the past, partly because we were just doing them, and then we don't have to do them nearly as much anymore. I think travel is I traveled an awful lot in my pre-COVID existence. it's been interesting to learn how much we can still get done without having to travel. And that causes you to think about, okay, how much traveling do I really have to do? What does it take me away from, from my family? And it's important to have those face-to-face connections and to really link with people so that you feel like you're working on it together. And what's the right level that you can balance. So I think it's important to look at how this forced disruption can change for the positive and learn some of the signals that come from that. In fact, it's interesting because my background in engineering is in control systems. And a control systems engineer always looks, they try to keep things stable, but they don't learn from a system when it's stable. They learn from a system when it's unstable, and they get a sense of the dynamics and what's happening. And that's when you learn what are the characteristics of that system. And so I'm really trying to understand those characteristics and think about, a new normal could actually be really positive. And so how do we get to that stage?
I couldn't agree with you more, Stephen. I think if we can exit this in our personal lives with the minimal amount of negative impact, for example, family members all intact or as much as possible, et cetera, it gives us that sense that we might find a silver lining. And I agree with you completely. It's giving me a lot of time to think about what travel do I need to do, as opposed to what was I just planning to do without thinking of it. It really has shifted us, hasn't it? And I also think it's given me the sense that any impatience, and I'm quite an impatient person by nature, any impatience I've had with this situation, I've just got to shelve that and manage the moment that we're in. And that's been a real life lesson for me because of my impatient nature. So you're really playing to the crowd here with me. I hope that those who listen really take the value of what you've said, Stephen. It's really great.
And impatience, I think oftentimes we couch impatience as a negative, but it can be positive if it's metered correctly, right? I mean, one of our phrases at the Gates Foundation is that we are impatient optimists, right? So we're impatient because we're optimistic at the same time, and we want the world to get to the place we see that it can get to. And I think that gets back to that, having that urgency, but then also having the marathon perspective that, okay, it's appropriate patience to know when we can act and when we have to wait.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. I think that many of these words that we bandy about are given some negative connotations. So impatience isn't regarded as a virtue, when actually it might just be that we allow it to tip over into all elements of our lives, like drumming the counter when we're waiting for the coffee, rather than just thinking, this is how long it takes to make the coffee. It's worth noting when we need our urgent thing. I always knew why there was a reason, Stephen, why you and I just seem to get on so well. That impatient optimist thing is something that I'm going to plagiarize with pride as well. That's something I like to be described as. Thank you so much, Stephen. Just a final thing from you. Any reflections before we close?
One of the things that's been interesting for me to learn is to be, put in an environment where I don't have the same skill sets as everyone else, because that diversity really helps me understand and contribute. And I think to continue to look for those opportunities across all the areas that we're working on. I mean, I think that's been part of the message that we've been discussing today, Catherine, as we've been talking, is it's okay. The old phrase, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably in the wrong room, right? But you have to be comfortable that you're not that smartest person, and that there's other people that have knowledge and that exchange and that offering. You have something to offer, there's something to learn, and how do we do that in an effective way? And I think, the more we continue to look for those opportunities, we just create this sense of fulfillment in the work that we're doing, because you get something, you receive something as well, and you contribute something, and that's a real positive exchange. And I've enjoyed that in my work, with pharmacies, with the pharmacy community. I've learned a huge amount from pharmacists, even though I'm not a pharmacist. But I continue to feel like I can contribute back as well. And so, again, continuing to look for those kinds of opportunities, I think has been a key component for me.
Well, I think that shines through, Stephen, really. And we at FIP are delighted to be continuing that work with you for the shared aims and the shared values. Even if it's small steps along the way, we all need to be shoulder to shoulder in our shared endeavours, really. It is what makes It is what makes work worthwhile. And if we can support our young people in being in worthwhile employment, or that every employment can have a worthwhile output, I think that would be a good outcome. Steven, thank you so much. Really, I've taken a lot of your time, and it's been a pleasure and an honor, and I know just how busy it is just ahead of leave. Have a great rest, and I look forward personally to catching up with you when you're back. But Steven, thank you so much for your time today.
And thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and to also communicate to the FIP audience. And I look forward to our continually working together to have impact in the world.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steven.